Now, the Greek word used in the Bible for hospitality is philoxenia, I think I pronounced that right, which means the love of strangers. So straight out the gate, though, I want to expand on this because the Bible is also very explicit when it tells us to love our enemies. So as we talk about hospitality, I want this to include how we treat those people that we don't really know, but also how we treat those people who don't think, look, act, or believe like we do. So that was the what is hospitality. Now for the why. I told you we'll go quite quick. The why can be summed up in 15 words, which we find in Romans 5, verse 10, which is, while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. Or a couple of verses earlier, we read, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You see, the important thing about hospitality is not what we do, but about why we do it. And the greatest display of hospitality that this world has ever seen is the Father's redemption through his Son. Jesus is our ultimate example of hospitality, and he never, ever hosted a fancy dinner party. And for those of you who are a bit of a know-it-all, I don't think the Last Supper was classed as fancy. We've been shown radical hospitality by God who left his perfect and glorious throne room of heaven to become a mere mortal, experiencing pain and hardship, and ultimately a love for us, an excruciating death. And also we can be welcomed into his family, and we can experience his perfect love for ourselves. We're children who've been given an abundance by our Heavenly Father, so we can afford generosity in all things, and we don't have to live in fear of running out. So when we grasp what God has done for us and the future that awaits us, we can see that we actually have a window of opportunity. And friends, I really want to encourage you that this is your only opportunity to care for people in faith, in pain, and in death. Because in Revelation 21, we're told he will dwell with them and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. You see, when we are with him for eternity, there will be no such thing as pain and death. We will not be required to live our lives based on an unseen God, because he will be in full view. So as we navigate worshipping him through our pain and suffering, and as we care for others through theirs, let's do it remembering that actually we won't have the opportunity to serve our God in this way again. So when we look at the Bible, there is no question in the importance that God puts on hospitality, and it's actually in his very law. So Deuteronomy 10:18-19 says, he defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt. Or Deuteronomy 24:19-22, when you are harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back to get it. Leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in the works of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines again. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that's why I command you to do this. Now, we may not have been physical slaves in Egypt, but spiritually, we were so much worse. And God calls us to remember this and to show his love through practical ways to those that need it. And I just want to add as well that we live in a culture where there is so much hostility to the foreigner and to other cultures and to other countries where our own countries end up prospering at the expense of others. And I believe that we need to stand firm and share God's passionate heart for the foreigner. If you want to look up examples in the Bible of sacrificial hospitality, look at Lot in Genesis chapter 19, Rahab in Joshua chapter 2, and Boaz in Ruth chapter 2. And there's also a spiritual impact of hospitality that we see. The Bible is very explicit about showing hospitality and what this can mean. Hebrews 13:2 tells us that we must not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. As with our actions and all our actions, there are spiritual implications for everything that we do. Now we're going to move on to point 3. Why don't we show hospitality? So why is loving strangers and those who are different from us so hard? I would suggest that our reasons are usually to do with fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of messing up our homes and our lives, fear of running out, fear of being embarrassed, fear of being hurt. And when we're tempted to fear, we need to look to God, because by fearing these things, we're choosing to believe the lie that we cannot trust God, that he is not enough, and that he will not come through, and that the cleanliness of our lives and our homes is more important to those whom God has sent to mess it up. And I'm just going to repeat that line because I feel like I need to hear this after the last couple of weeks. We are choosing to believe the lie that the cleanliness of our lives and our homes is more important than those whom God has sent to us to mess it up. Perhaps one of the most powerful fears that we can have is a fear of getting hurt. As foster carers, there's a phrase that Tim and I hear quite a lot. People say, "Oh, that's amazing, I'd love to do that, but I'd care too much and I'd get too attached." Now, I always try and ignore the unspoken implication that we don't really care and we don't really get attached to the kids we look after. A bit awkward. Or the humble brag that apparently this person just loves too much and cares too much to help kids that need somewhere to live. Sorry if I sound a bit cynical. But I do gladly inform them that actually this in fact makes them the perfect people to be foster carers. None of them signed up yet, but we'll see. Because actually getting too attached is the assignment. You see, children in foster care, they come into foster care because their biological families are unable to look after them and keep them safe. And that might be temporarily, that might be long term. And that could be for a variety of reasons. But that means that all kids in care have experienced loss. And depending on their individual story and background, often their ability to form healthy attachments and relationships can be affected. And it's our role as foster carers to protect them and show them how to trust and relate to other people in a healthy way for however long they are with us. And I think we can often avoid caring for other people because it gets messy. And because we're afraid that we'll get too attached and that we'll get hurt. But when we look at the cross, we see a Saviour who was not afraid to get too attached. And because of it, he was abandoned, rejected, and hurt in the most brutal of ways. And he calls us to pick up our cross and follow him. Now, I feel like I go back to me accidentally offending people, so apologies in advance. But there's a meme that seems to be quite popular in Christian circles, especially among women. And there's lots of different versions, but the general gist of it is that when you feel X, Y, or Z, then straighten up your crown and remember whose daughter you are. Yeah, remember whose daughter you are and straighten up your crown. In fact, I hear a lot of motivational quotes about straightening that crown and about being a daughter of a king. And I think, I know this is going to be controversial, but I think we need to deconstruct this. Because, not only because actually Jesus is king and he's our brother, so actually it would be more accurate if you say, remember who your big brother is, but also because the only crown he wore on earth was a crown of thorns. And I want to rewrite that meme and say, when you feel you might be getting too attached and get hurt, remember who your big brother is, straighten your crown of thorns, and open up your arms wide. When you grasp that all you have is from him, and that he calls you to be generous with it, then you will realize it's not actually ours to withhold from other people, and that he will always provide. We can be generous when we discover that we don't need to fear loss. Okay, on to our final point. How can we show hospitality? Now, it's good to remember that hospitality is kindness to strangers, not meeting all of their needs or fixing them in the way that we think they need to be fixed. There's only one that can meet their needs, and it's our great commission to introduce them to him. If we put ourselves in a role that was not designed for us, we will be exhausted and we will break. I've tried. We won't have capacity for every stranger that we come across, so what do? We live by the example of Christ. He stopped for the one in front of him. He welcomed the interruption. And most importantly, he was led by the Holy Spirit. There were times when he embraced the interruption, like when he was touched by the woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years, when he was on his way to heal the ruler's daughter. Talk about a busy day. He stopped and praised her for her faith, and he healed her. But there were also times where he did not do what was expected of him. He didn't rush to his friend Lazarus' side when he was ill. He lived in obedience to the Spirit to see the one in front of him that the Father was calling him to interact with. And I want to encourage you that you can be confident that if God calls you to do it, he will give you the capacity for it. But it may take stepping out in faith to find that out. And I know this might be a shocking thing to hear in our world today, but we aren't actually called to be busy, burnt out, or overwhelmed. That's not how we were designed. Are you using capacity for things, maybe good things, that actually he hasn't really called you to do? Are you filling up so much of your time and your headspace with things that where there's no room for interruption and no room for kindness to a stranger? So how do we practice hospitality? I think the answer is in the question. We practice. Who here works in a setting where it involves interacting with people? It might be clients, patients, children, customers. Anyone here that kind of works with people? Yeah, quite a few. Yeah. Brilliant. So if this is you, just have a think, you don't need to shout, but like how did you feel on your first day in that role? So the first time you were in front of a class or with a customer or with a patient or a client by yourself, just have a think about how you felt at that time. Now, I started my career in healthcare when I was 17 as a healthcare assistant, and I was terrified. Caring for people who were ill and for who were depending on me was really daunting. And I've been an occupational therapist now for 20 years nearly, which shows my age, and have seen thousands of patients. And so I'm now at a point where actually very little phases me in a work context. And this is what happens when you practice hospitality. It starts off daunting, and then you practice it, and you build up confidence. And before you know it, she's not here, but you become Jan, who will talk to anyone and invite anyone. Let's practice it. Let's just try the little things. And as you do, you start to build that confidence. Now, about 6 or 7 years ago, I was given a little succulent plant in this pot by a lady at my church. And over the years, I have repotted it. And it became this. And then it also had multiple babies. Now, why am I showing you this? A bit random. But I think that we can remember this image to remind us that as we practice hospitality, our capacity expands. And as we expand and purposefully expand our capacity for others, and i.e. the bigger pot, we grow and we become fruitful. And that fruit can look different in each of us. So it could be that actually we end up building new relationships. It could be that it expands our mind and our perspective of other people. And this is in my notes, but I'm just going to do a little side that one of the things this does as well, and this for Tim and I, one of the things this has done is it's absolutely smashed our prejudices. And I think when you grow up, I grew up in the church in the 90s, which can be very much like, you don't wear hats in church. Oh, Tim. Like, you know, like, you dress a certain way, you know, you look appropriate, and, you know, you behave a certain way. And I think I just want to bring that challenge, you know, as foster carers, like, we find that it changes your expectations. And I think, you know, you don't know what people are going through. And it would be so easy to sit here and be like, well, what are they wearing? Or, well, they're just sat there on their phone. Or, well, what are they doing? Or, what are they doing? And the reality is they're here. And you may not understand how much of a win that is and how important and what a battle that was. And I think I just want to a little bit challenge those of us that have kind of been brought up in that culture of this is how you perform, this is how you behave at church. Actually, we have no idea what goes on in people's lives. And we have no idea the battles they're facing and the baggage they're carrying. And actually, you know, if they turn up looking different to what you expect they should, they're here. And I think, you know, I just think that's a really important reminder of us as we seek to show hospitality and love the stranger. It's to love all the strangers, no matter what they look like, no matter what they're doing, no matter, what fruity language they might be using. I think it's just, we're called to love them as people. Anyway, I'll get back to my notes now. So it could be that, as I say, expand your mind or perspective, or we might find ourselves growing in one or more of the fruits of the Spirit. Now, in my context, just over the last couple of weeks, showing hospitality has meant that I've been challenged by the concept of grace far beyond anything I've ever been challenged before. Sometimes we have to walk the path of providing hospitality to those that don't want it or that don't really understand their need for it. And that is why we must serve for God's sake alone and not for gratitude or for acknowledgement. Because as I said earlier, that's the box of chocolates kind of hospitality. Now, in Matthew chapter 25, Jesus talks about final judgment after death and what will be said to those who followed him. He says, "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me.' Then the righteous will answer him, 'Lord, when did we see you hungry or feed you, and thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?' The king will reply, 'Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me.'" Now, hospitality is not a special calling for those who have the gift. We're all called to show our love for Christ through caring for the least of these, regardless of your house size, your marital status, or your salary. Now, about 20 years ago, I went to South Africa to spend time at a church that lived this out in so many ways. And they told me about a homeless boy that used to sleep on the grass outside the church. And one evening, the church leader felt prompted to bring him into the prayer meeting. And he placed the boy in the center of the gathered church. And he said, "God says, this is my child. What are you going to do with him?" And a woman stepped forward and said, "From today, I am your mother." And she took him into her home and she raised him. Now, I want you to imagine that tonight you're getting ready for bed and there's a knock on your front door. And you open the door and there's an adult and a child standing there. The adult introduces himself as a social worker and says this child has to leave their family because they weren't safe and they have nowhere to go. How would you respond? We may not have a homeless kid living on the grass outside of our building, but every day we as foster carers get a list of children in our area that need somewhere to stay. As foster carers, we are not supernatural or special. Anyone that knows us would agree with that. We're just willing. And I've seen the need, and I will unashamedly stand here and ask you to consider signing up to be that doorstep, even if it's just for one child, one time. Now, for you, it may be that fostering or adoption is not realistic, but there may be something or someone that is. Who is it that God is putting on your heart, or who is it that's been laying dormant on your heart for years? If you don't know where to look, then can I suggest the 3 categories that God described in his law? The foreigner. In this cultural climate, hospitality towards those from other countries and cultures is so important. Diversity is becoming a dirty word in the West, and arrogance and pride are now promoting prejudice and claiming that this is of God. The Bible is clear on how God expects us to treat other people, and as his church, we need to be at the forefront of this. The fatherless. I've already mentioned fostering and adoption, but can I encourage you to lift your eyes to the wider picture? What would Basingstoke look like if the church loved those who've never experienced unconditional love? You see, trauma is generational. One generation's pain is passed down to the next. Imagine if the parents who were struggling to care for their kids and who were carrying so much pain from their own lives and from the generations before them were loved by the church. Imagine if they experienced the healing that Jesus has to offer them before their kids go into care. Imagine if families could be kept together and saved as a result of the mandate that God has given us and the comfort that we've been given from him that we can share with them. And the widow. Who do you know that is alone and vulnerable, that doesn't have a support network, who needs providing for, whether materially, practically, relationally, who's facing loss, bereavement, and rejection? I'm sure we all know someone that comes to mind. Now, as we see how outrageously hospitable God has been to us, and we look forward to the day where we will be with him in eternity because of his hospitality, we must embrace our responsibility while we are here on earth to show kindness to our fellow image bearers. We must act out our love for Christ in the way he describes in the passage we read from Matthew 25. Did you know that you have never met a person that doesn't bear the image of God? It's easy to look at people like Tim and Jules as they move away to North Africa and see them as missionaries. But the truth is that we're all on God's mission. In whatever postcode we're in, we're no less missionaries here in Basingstoke as others are across the world, and hospitality is a massive part of that mission. Now, my little bonus point before I close is that hospitality is two-way. We see in the Bible that Jesus accepted hospitality wherever he went. He let others care for him and provide for him. And I think that there's probably some people here today who are quite confident in showing hospitality to other people, but who won't receive it from other people. Now, whether this is down to self-sufficiency, pride, self-protection, identity, I want to encourage you to learn from Jesus. We are not better than him, and we do not need others less than he did. Jesus was the stranger. He left his Father and came to us. We were the stranger, and through God's divine hospitality, we are now his children. And now we are called to love the stranger because they bear the image of our God.